Our next topic is diverse voices. And I do note we have a real thought leader here, Dr. Candace Boyd from Region 3 EPA. Candace, thank you for coming. Candace was our commencement speaker last year, or earlier this year. And like I said, a real thought leader in diversity and equity. But our speaker today is an old friend of mine. I mean that in two respects. One is we've worked together for a long time, but he's also really old. Fred Tutman, our Patuxent Riverkeeper. Fred has been working with our colleagues at the Chesapeake Biological Lab for some time, and he has been the sole African-American riverkeeper, and he's been at it for, I think, 25 years or so. And Fred, it really is somebody who's really found his voice of late to really be a thought leader in developing a diverse and equitable approach going forward. So thanks, Fred, my old friend.
You know, the crazy thing is, I never know exactly what the heck I'm going to say until I step up to this darn mic. As much as I plan these things out, it's somehow, I wait for that bolt of lightning to say, oh, what are my lines? So here's the deal. This is a little bit of a personal talk. I'm going to hop around a bit. I'm going to share some lessons learned, tell a little bit of my own story, because my own story is kind of what has informed our approach at Patuxent Riverkeeper to doing community-based collaborations, which I think are hugely important and really rich sources of knowledge and wisdom and partnering. I can't resist. Is collaboratory an actual word in the dictionary? I wasn't sure, but it is now. Okay. So I need to talk a little bit about race and class, and let me clear the air. It took me about 20 years to get comfortable talking about race in front of a large group of people. In the old days, it was a subject you avoided, right? Because you didn't want to offend anyone, didn't want to shut down conversations. To me, race is culture. I don't think it's skin color. I have a hard time legitimizing the idea you can tell a darn thing about somebody by looking at the color of their skin. And in fact, like most black families, my family has people of many different colors in it. And so when I talk about race, I'm talking about mindset. Right? The mindset that Christopher Columbus had at the era that he was in, for example, where he had real confusions about the legitimacy of the people already on these shores, right? He was following the mindset of the time, but his particular racism, I think, was embedded within the culture. And the culture is obviously evolving and changing. So let me get started. I'm going to assume this is my little gadget. I don't have a, oh, I do have a repeater here, or a thingy. So let me clear the air that I left the television industry in year 2000 after about 20 years of being a cinematographer, videographer, writer, producer. Had been an on-air radio guy. When I was 15 in junior high school in Amherst, Massachusetts, I used to ride my bicycle after school to WFCR radio station, where I would anchor the news right after All Things Considered, which back then, in the early 70s, their slogan was, "We're a rare medium that's well done." And you know, in the analog era, the engineers took pity on me and they showed me stuff, and I became adept at cutting tape, a useless skill in the digital era. But I would say that my understanding of what environmentalism was in the 70s was virtually nil. I think I had seen that film Silent Running with Bruce Dern in it, and so I kind of figured environmentalists were kind of wacky. As much as he had the right ideas, he was a little bit twisted, you know. But I also learned that with respect to my own heritage, I became an outdoorsy guy at a pretty early age. Right next door to us is the National Aquarium, where one of my ancestors was one of the prime founders, actually Henry Hall, my great uncle. Actually, I used to feed the fish in his house on Mosier Street here in Baltimore as a summer job when I was a teenager. Quite an interesting guy, quite a character. But my father, who was from Druid Hill Avenue here in Baltimore, and the whole family has a strong heritage here. Actually, we all worked at Channel 13. In 1978, I was Oprah Winfrey's intern at Channel 13 WJC here in Baltimore. My sister Paula was a television reporter who married a Baltimore vice cop. here in Baltimore. But my father was very concerned that since he had married the farmer's daughter, my mother, who lived out in the boondocks near Annapolis on a family farm, my father wanted to expose us to his world, his environment. And so my sisters and I in summers were sent to Baltimore to experience what our Baltimore cousins were experiencing. And on one of those trips, I met a very interesting guy, Dr. Herbert Frisbee, who was the founder of the Matthew Henson Society. So it still goes on today here in Baltimore. And I learned about the accomplishments of the polar explorer, Matthew Henson, from this little guy in a battered brown suit, a high school teacher. One of those pictures you can see is actually him in a flight suit, because late in life he decided to go where Matthew Henson had gone, to go to the North Pole, but he was too old to walk there, so he convinced the US Air Force to fly him there, to fly him over the North Pole. So he's the guy in the middle. You can see the smallest guy in that picture. But what impressed me was the idea that people of color could be inventors, explorers, and scientists, and all kinds of stuff, not just diversity. I don't think diversity is a thing. I mean, what's diversity, right? It's an afterthought, it's an asterisk, it's a head count. It's really not full engagement. And so I carry that idea with me through most of my life, that I'm not going to be somebody else's diversity. To paraphrase James Baldwin, I'm not your diversity. You know? So along the way, my family, interestingly enough, my father, who was deeply entrenched in the civil rights movement, moved us out of the country in the 60s, sent us to Africa. They told me that they wanted my sisters and I to grow up in a non-race-oriented society. And so we were intentionally raised around white kids so that wouldn't dim or change our outlook or prospects in life. I went to a British boarding school in the Usambara Mountains of Tanzania. In fact, in 1969, when the lunar landing happened, I listened to it on a shortwave radio from St. Michael's Academy in the upcountry Sierra Leone. Really bleak place, by the way. One of the worst experiences I had was going to this boarding school that was like going to a penitentiary. You know, you could literally buy stuff with candy. Candy was the coin of the realm. You weren't allowed to have cash or money. You could buy literally toilet paper, of all things. Andrex, they called it, because it was really good toilet paper, because the stuff they had in the institution was really lousy. And so if you had lots and lots of candy, you could buy lots and lots of toilet paper. So that set the stage for me having a career in the media that took me pretty much all over the world. I traveled to various African countries as an adult. Hopefully my little thingy hasn't dried up here. It's not advancing the frame. Whoop. And now it's gone. There we go. So this is the proverbial salt mine. I was there in right around 1999, 2000. The salt mine at Lac Rosa in Senegal. And what these guys do, it's pretty terrible working conditions. You can see some of these people are wearing tights. They actually protects their skin from the corrosive salt water. And they haul this stuff out using these leaky boats that you can also kind of see there. They're not too watertight. They don't have to be because of the buoyancy of the salt water. These folks are getting paid something like 15 cents a day. Like I said, terrible working conditions. They go out in these boats and they hop out and they're standing in water literally up to their chins, and they're reaching down with these scoop nets and they're pulling up the salt and piling it in the boats. So I'm talking to an old man, not too many teeth left. I knew he was somebody of importance because he had to himself the only shade tree. You know, that figured this guy had some gravitas, right? No one else is competing for the shade. He must be really someone important. I talked to a translator, and he explained to me that when he was a boy, people were able to walk out in water up to their ankles and just pick the salt up. Over the years, they've excavated so much salt out of this thing that it's now the water's up to their chin. And so I said, well, look, what happens when the water gets over your head and you're going to have to find a different way to get this salt out of here? Worse, what happens when you run out of salt? What are you going to do then? This guy broke out laughing. Silly American, what the heck do you know? Young man, he said, there will always be salt, and there will always be a way to get it. And I thought, wow, isn't this interesting? Because, you know, on the other side of the world, you have these people in the Chesapeake Bay and in America, and they have the exact same ethic. They have no concept of scarcity, no sense of obsolescence, no sense of sustainability. Wow, and yet we're giving advice to this developing nation as though we have the answers. These guys are actually pretty much in the same place we are. That was important to me, to understand that we didn't have all the answers, that we could learn some things from them or from each other. That was important. So This is the Katana Pit, deepest copper mine in the world, 5 miles deep. Over there, they pile the mine tailings on top of the land and create mesas. Here, we drop it in the nearest waterway. It's a very different approach to disposing of our waste. But what I thought was interesting was the acid mine drainage actually causes the resettlement of people in the way. The government takes a cut of what the copper mines make. They tried to nationalize them years ago, found they didn't have the technological capacity, so they went into business with the big copper mine companies, and they take a split from what they earn. And so, to avoid impairing their revenue stream, the government doesn't regulate them, they just move people out of the way. And they move them to the nearest unwanted piece of land they can find. A pretty unjust outcome, right? These are people who used to live on the waterfront, now they live in a desert someplace. Somebody handed them a shovel and said, start digging. Dig yourself a well. So I visited this place, and by the way, I was in Zambia, which is where this is, and I went there to try and start a Waterkeeper program, which later turned out to be pretty unfeasible. The government was not supportive. And the ripple effects of this, I don't know if you see in this picture what I didn't see until I got home. There's something off about it, isn't it? It's the kid with the gun. I remember this kid. I remember this kid in this forlorn place who was not like the other kids, right? Who were doing what kids do pretty much everywhere, playing soccer and having fun. Here was a kid who was glowering, who had an attitude, and I don't frankly know if it was a real gun or a toy gun, but he was clearly a kid who knew the only way out of here is probably violence, or probably I need to get out of here the only way that I possibly can. And so I understood, I connected that the wages of this dire injustice that had been levied upon these folks, no hope, no place worth being, no schools, no stores, no nothing, are simply abandoned by their government because they were in the way of a copper mine. And we play it a little differently in this country, but we have these environmental justice struggles that are formed very differently here, but are nonetheless equally unjust. How do you engage with people in a hopeless place? How do you overcome their circumstances so you can have a conversation about a collaboration? It's real. It's a problem that's real. So in the other job, we never helped anybody. I was really resentful after 20 years of working in television at a pretty high level. I traveled with The Who. In fact, any of the deficiencies in this talk are probably because I did drugs with The Who while on the road. Peter Townsend and Entwistle and the others when they were still above ground. Worked in the White House Office of Communications, gave jokes to Ronald Reagan. He collected them handily, loved to write the punchlines down. At least in my acquaintanceship with the guy, his mind was pretty sharp when when it came to jokes. So I understood that people fought to get into the industry, and I fought to get out. I changed my cell phone number, went to law school, thinking that maybe I'd go into politics or something like that. Being an environmentalist wasn't on my radar screen. In fact, I remember in the 80s when almost nobody had a full-time job being a full-time environmentalist, right? The joke was you had to have a spouse with a real job and benefits if you wanted to protect the environment full-time. Now, fast forward 30 to 40 years later, we have an entire industry, a non-profit industry of people who feel very entitled to keep their jobs protecting the environment. It's a very different culture and a very different size up. Bill, give me a 5-minute warning because I forgot to set my timer up here. I actually have one. So I don't miss that industry as much as I still run into people occasionally on airplanes that I used to work with at CBS and places like that, and they say, "Oh my God, I thought you were dead. What are you doing now?" I say, "Well, you know, I'm a riverkeeper." A riverkeeper? You can see in their eyes now, I'm really dead now, right? But the deal is, these movements have begun to shift and change. I mean, all throughout my media career, I did work for the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay for free. I think I made like 16 films for those guys. Worked with Jay Hare at National Wildlife Federation in the early 80s. If I can name drop some more, I worked with Kermit the Frog. John Denver was in that loop. Eddie Albert, who also gave me jokes that I later gave to Ronald Reagan, incidentally. Eddie Albert was quite an interesting guy from Green Acres. And people of color were pretty scarce and rare in those movements at that time, quite frankly. I resented that I'd left an industry that while we never helped anyone or did anything about their pain or their suffering, we exploited it. We laughed about it at the lobby bar that night. We turned in our stories. We didn't really touch or try to help people, which was really what I had joined the media to do. I was a guy that really believed in, the first company I started was called Transcultural Multimedia. I was really interested in hearing other culture stories and kind of providing that bridge. And I couldn't do that in network television, right? The glass was always half empty for me, right? And with respect to inclusion in these movements, depending on whom you talk to, the glass is either half full or half empty. But I would say, wherever we are, it's nowhere close to the kinds of collaborations and meaningful connections we could potentially have in these places where, again, we don't have all the answers. We don't really know all that we need to know. And quite frankly, I think I heard someone, one of the secretaries earlier, mention a black church. I would like to see movements that are like black churches, right? You see the Blues Brothers, guys on trampolines, folks doing all kinds of stuff. That's diversity. That's a different take on the environment, and we have to have the airspace to be able to accommodate people being themselves in these movements. Nonetheless, most of the movements that I encounter in this work, most of the conservation movements, are very provisional about the inclusion of people in color. We don't want to wreck the experiences with the people already here. We don't want to scare off the money. We don't want to change the mission. What's inevitable is that if you become really connected to communities and inclusive, is that these movements will change. If they don't, people will boycott them, which I think is essentially what's happening now. These are not inviting places for people of color. In fact, my involvements with the Appalachian Trail Society and various other groups, National Wildlife and others, really generated pushback for having too many people of color in them. This was actually said to me in an open meeting, that if we let this place have people in the public, that you'll have guys in baggy jeans and gold jewelry drinking old English malt liquor down by the river. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop in that room when that was said at a meeting. Likewise, at a trail meeting I went to when we were talking about inclusion and diversity, I heard somebody stage whispering about hoods in the woods. Oh, now we're going to have hoods in the woods. And I darn near quit that organization right about then, because I realized that's a hell of a hole to dig yourself out of. Right? If you arrive at these movements and you're classified as the hoods in the woods, where do you go from there? There's no place to go but down, essentially. So I wrote a newspaper, or rather an insertion, that went in the Bay Journal, and it got syndicated all over the country. Why green is not the new black. And I got calls from all over the country, from people trying to solve the same problem I was, which is essentially, how do I create a conservation organization exactly like the kind I'd like to join, right? And the day after I wrote that article, 2 of our board members quit. The next day, several people said, how do I get on your board? The people of color in this picture are exactly those people. Vernice, Sakobi, I think you know some of these people, some of you do at least. Tracy McCurdy, who's a lawyer who actually helps people save air property all over the country. She works with the Latino and black communities to save property that's in the family lineage. And so I have an activist board, Rabia Noor, a Native American medicine woman, who incidentally was connected to that group in Senegal by coincidence. We didn't even know that when we met, that she had been a part of some of that work that I was doing in Africa under a Ford Foundation grant. I eventually worked with voodoo practitioners in Benin and Togo and Senegal to connect them to the Western science community. I taught them how to create websites, how to create video programs, how to make radio shows, basically connecting the traditional African healing establishment to the rest of the world so they could, again, tell their own stories. And that's a real thing. Working with witch doctors is no. These folks who say they can levitate and do all this stuff. You have to give latitude to the belief systems of these cultures. And what people told me in Senegal was they can't afford modern science. They can't afford Western medicine, right? They don't have insurance that covers any of this stuff. But more importantly, there's no spiritual basis to this stuff that connects to their culture. I heard that again and again and again, that their expectation was that practitioners working in their society and in their culture would at least have some spiritual component in their doctrines that would connect to the other side. They treat the physical body, but they treat both the mind and the spirit. And that was missing. And I think that's, again, a signal to us that to the extent you want to connect to these various communities, you have to find some way to at least have some humility about their belief systems and to accord them some respect for what they know, not just what we know. To do otherwise is colonialist, in my view, and we have to decolonize these movements any way that we possibly can to give them the freedom of mind to be able to engage with these communities. I had a heckler at a talk I gave very similar to this one a few years ago, and the heckler turned out to be another waterkeeper in the Chesapeake who started shouting, "The revolution will not be funded! The revolution will not be funded!" He deeply resented what I had to say. That night I had a gin and tonic, went online and Googled "The revolution will not be funded" and found this incredible book. It's free. It's been out of print for years, but it's now been uploaded and you can find it. It basically lays out an entire universe of both activism and environmental work that is done at a community level where they don't want to be connected to the funding structure of the nonprofit complex because they know that will fundamentally change their work. It never had occurred to me that there was such a universe out there. And along the way, I got connected to Goddard College. I still work for Goddard College in their graduate studies department. In fact, my colleague and I, Sarah Barbara Williams at Goddard College in Vermont, actually run sustainability and social innovation. And that's a crazy place, Goddard, because you can get people on all sides of the spectrum. Brilliant folks, fantastic folks doing incredible work, and real nutballs, to be honest. I had a student last semester writing a thesis on sustainable fracking. She said her daddy from Texas owns an oil company, and we got a sustainable fracking program. It's like, yeah, if you say so. I just work here. So in sum, let me say, the Taking Nature Black movement, of which we are deeply a part of, is a vast network of people of color in the sciences and in the environmental fields who are on the other side of the street, I would say, from most of the work that's being done in this room. They're not funded by the same places, they're not connected to the same institutions, and it's an amazing community of folks. The Black to the Future Nature Alliance, a new organization that we've mentored. Again, the spiritual work that we do at Patuxent Riverkeeper down in the south of the river. The summer camps that draw their talent and their mentorship from the communities we serve. Our partnership with the Paper Hand Puppet Theater in North Carolina, where people dress up like animals and do educational work. And it's a pretty vast universe of people of color, and it's desperately needed, I think, in these airspaces, desperately needed. It brings a liveliness and a passion and a context. And last but not least, I have to throw in a plug for blacksmithing because I think it relates to community organizing. I'm deeply invested in blacksmithing and metallurgy, but I would say it's hot in that kitchen. You're working with something that's hard to maneuver. You can make something beautiful out of it, right? But it takes focus. It takes your own personal investment. Each piece is a little different. Frankly, probably takes more time than most people are willing to put into it if they just want to study a community or organize people or use a community as a means towards their end. But in the end, it's about that very meticulous individual approach. So treat your organizing like blacksmithing. Work on that beautiful piece, turning that piece of trash into something gorgeous. And you'll be really impressed with the outcome that you get. So there it is. Just a few clues, at least lessons I've learned along the way. I thank you for your time.